My name is Paul Sheeler. I am third generation. My son is fourth generation Christmas tree producer. My wife and I and our son own Evergreen Acres Christmas Tree Farm in Auburn, Pennsylvania. Our farm was started in 1945 when my father got out of the service. We're mostly a wholesale operation. We're shipping several thousand trees into New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and most of our customers are in southeastern Pennsylvania. I worked for Penn State Cooperative Extension for 28 years, and my specialty area of education that I taught other growers was Christmas tree production. This is a top off a 6-foot tree. I just cut it off the other day. Isn't that beautiful? That's genetics for you. Bad genetics. Genetics plays a big part in this industry. Hopefully we'll learn some of that. The next one, I'm going to try to get through site prep. I'm going to try to get through that one a little bit faster because I really think you want it, and I think I'd like to give it to you more time on weed control. I think that's a critical part of the Christmas tree business, and I'd like to spend a little bit more time on that. Okay? Go ahead. Oh, hold on a second. That is one of our tractors. I've sold that tractor now. I have one that's a little bit bigger than that now. That's a Northwest rotary tiller. That thing, well, you can see these are concolor fir stumps in here that we soil tested, we limed, we fertilized everything on the top, and then the rototiller comes right over, rototills everything, and we can go right through there and plant. If I don't subsoil it. Now, that's something else we'll get into. Okay. Reasons for good site preparations. A good site preparation starts your weed control program. You can amend your soils, what we talked about before, your pH, your nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. Loosens, compacted, and aerates the soil. We'll talk a little bit on some of the other slides here, breaking down hard pans or plow pans. Ease in planting. I told you how the soil likes to flow around the shoe of the planter. And all of that will lead to better root development. Roots make plants. Okay? Just because it's below ground, we don't ignore it. And it's we should be paying as much attention to that as we are the top. Okay. This is that one field we said we see a couple more pictures of. This is the way that field looked like in mid-September. This was what happened in July. This field had not been cultivated, had not been plowed in 15 years. It's been mowed every year. The guy who owns the property, this is lease ground, the guy who owned the property would mow it every year. Well, I went through there in July sometime, mid-July, and I mowed it. That takes everything down. Now, what's going to happen? It's going to reflush. Nice, young, succulent growth. All kinds of weeds. There was anything from poison ivy to ragweed to goldenrod, anything you wanted. A lot of thistle and a lot of milkweed. Matter of fact, you can see the big stand of dead milkweeds right through here. That was all milkweed right through there. But now I've killed it with Roundup. I went through in September and just annihilated it. Those are all perennial weeds. Those perennial weeds will come up and give you competition with your new plants. Okay? We got to try to get those perennial weeds under control. So sprayed the whole thing off with Roundup at the rate of about 2 quarts to the acre. About 2 quarts to the acre, about a half gallon to the acre. Then we went through, based on our soil tests, I had a lime truck come in. It's a lot easier to get a lime truck in, and it's half the cost. You think, man, buying a truck of lime like that is expensive. To buy bagged lime, I will pay close to $100 a ton for bagged lime, and I got to apply it. I can get a lime truck in for $36 a ton, and he applies it. The only difference is I have to have enough ground to take that much lime. He will only haul 12 ton. Minimum order is 12 ton. Okay. Well, we get it limed, and then we get the field plowed. Okay. And then after it's plowed, put the spreader on, and that's when we're adding our nitrogen and our potassium and phosphorus, all based on our soil test results. Oh, I should back up a minute. What I also did Here's the field. The lime truck went through. I took my fertilizer, whatever I was applying. I cut the application in half. Half went on top and got plowed down. The other half is going on now, on top of the plowed ground.
Plowed or rototilled?
This one is plowed. I would much rather plow a field. I think I get better results from plowing. I'm actually turning the soil over than I do with the rototiller. And, but the rototiller is mainly for the stumps. The rototiller is slower, and it's an expensive piece of machinery to be using when I can use an old moldboard plow. That rototiller is $18,000 for that tiller. And I don't like to use that for something that I can easily do with a moldboard plow.
This preparation is done the previous fall?
This was done the previous fall. That's exactly right. Yep. And the
plow and disc.
Plow and disc.
Okay.
Yep. The sequence of application, well here, I just got done saying this. Split your lime application if it takes more than 2 tons to the acre. If your lime requirements, your soil test says we have to put 4 tons to the acre on, put 2 tons on, plow it, and put the other 2 tons on the plowed ground. And then split your potassium and phosphorus, pre-tillage, post-tillage, and your nitrogen. If your nitrogen is something different than is in a compound mix here, add your nitrogen just before your final disking. What I normally do, my potassium, no, that's potassium. My potassium is added, NPK, is added in the form of 1846O. So I get 40% phosphorus, and 18% nitrogen, and that's all the nitrogen I really need to get that plant started. So I like using the compound of 1846O. It's a good compound, a good starter for. It's a good overall fertilizer for young trees. The only thing is you better hope your potash is up high enough in the soil because you're not applying any potash. And then your tillage method, moldboard plowed, rototill, chisel plow. And my problem with chisel plowing, we go back to that other field, you can imagine what the sod was like in that field. And chisel plowing, you'll get a lot more clumps up on top. And there was somebody that talked to me at one time, and I threw it in here, just tilling the rows that you plan to plant. The only problem I have with that is, how do I get those rows straight?
Well,
yeah, it's trying to get straight rows. This is the tractor driver that puts the straight rows in my farm, right there. She's queen of the tractor drivers. She's a little bit slow on the turnarounds, okay? And my son gets to getting angry with her because she takes so long to turn the tractor around. But the other year, she wasn't ready in time. We went out, planted, he drove the tractor, and the trees looked like a dog's hind leg. Yeah, she can put a straight row down. Now this is important. How many of you, somebody talked to me in here about clay subsoil. Did someone say something to me about a clay subsoil? Okay, you know, you have decent topsoil, and then you have a heavy clay pan underneath there. Well, what can happen with that? You get heavy rains, and it comes down, it perks down through your decent soil, like it should. It hits that clay pan, and where does it go? It has to run off horizontally, because it can't get through. This is where a subsoil comes in. And the other thing is, if your land has been cultivated and plowed year after, let's say you're following corn, and it had been corn in that field for the past 10 years. Well, and it had been moldboard plowed. And the bottom of the plow rubs against the bottom of the ground. And the tractor tire running in the furrow packs the ground. And that's called a plow pan. It will develop a plow pan the same way you can get a clay pan in a soil, okay? And these subsoilers, this is only a single tooth subsoiler, as you get bigger in multiple tooth subsoilers, it takes some big horsepower to pull it, okay? Now that single tooth is on a Ford 4000. I'm trying to think if it was about 48 horse or something like that on a Ford 4000. And I could stop the tractor with that single tooth. if I hooked into something, okay? Which isn't all that bad either, then you don't break something.
Yeah, right.
But that subsoiler will go down and it will dig down. If I can get this down to here, from that tip of that tooth to there is about 2 feet. And I am ripping that plow pan or that clay pan underneath the ground. And it greatly increases your internal drainage. I subsoil every field.
And you're just doing that where the predicted rows are going, or are you doing the whole field like that?
It all depends. About every 6 feet. Now, that doesn't mean that that is exactly where the seedling's going to go, because I don't know where that's going to be. It's in a plowed field. I'm just ripping about every 6 feet. And then there are fields that help with my internal drain. Let's say they're on a hillside like this. I will subsoil up and down. If I'm trying to get some internal drainage happening, I'm not going to get internal drainage going across the side hill. I subsoil up and down the hill. Okay? Makes a mess out of a field. It really does. Subsoiling really tears a place up. But then you disc everything off, and sometimes you don't ever get those moguls back out of it.
No.
All right? Next. Then, what we did, we planted a cover crop. I went to a local seed grain mill. I got a pickup truckload of wheat, threw it in the cyclone spreader, went in and blasted it all over the whole field. Then I went back in and leveled the whole thing off with a spring tooth harrow to give my soil seed content, and that's what I ended up with. That's the following spring. This is what the wheat looks like. That was wheat the following spring. The deer had a field day over the winter. The deer had a field day in there over the winter, eating all that wheat coming up. Ease in planting, when you have plowed ground like that, the furrow or the hole opens easy, no heavy sod or clumps to contend with, the soil flows around, and all of this we talked about, and we help prevent the J-rooting. Go ahead. Okay, planting can be done via planters, tractor drawn planter, augers, planting bars, and shovel. These motorized augers aren't so bad, okay? You can get handheld ones, and after about 30 holes, you think you're going to die. But there's one on the market specially made for Christmas tree growers. I don't know the name of it. It's the one that's made down in Lidditz. Transporter. There you go.
CTE.
Yeah, CTE. You have one?
Yep.
Okay. And it's a three-wheeler that you push through the field, and you can just punch these holes right down in. The only thing I caution you about augered holes is that if you are augering holes in a heavier soil, when I say heavy, I'm talking clay. If you're augering holes, you can get what is called a flower pot effect. Can you picture what's happening? The auger's going down, packing the walls of the hole, and it comes back up. Now you put your seedling in there, and now you have a flower pot that the roots have difficulty getting out of. On loose gravel or a loam soil, no problem. But just a little caution on that heavier clay ground. Go ahead. Okay. Proper field layout will save you years of extra work and frustration. You can see this field was laid out. This slide really doesn't do it justice, but you can see quite a few kinks in here in this field, and looks like it was planted somewhat on a contour, and then it hooks back this way. Earlier on, you saw pictures of some of my small tractors, and when we get into the herbicides, you'll see them again. But my sprayer nozzles are out front, and the adjustment is set. Now, as I'm driving through here, trying to spray my herbicides, and the rows start going like this, my adjustments are no longer accurate on my sprayer. Now, when the fields are laid out like this, thus the tractor driver, when they're laid out nice and straight like this, you can see how easy it is to spray my herbicides on there because the adjustment of the sprayer does not have to change. Nice straight rows. Go ahead. Block size and row spacing is you base it on equipment. This is something we said kind of in the beginning. Access roads so you can get your sprayer through. Your smaller tractor, that's the herbicide sprayer. And then this is the Vicon spreader. I don't know, we were talking about it earlier, that oscillates back and forth. You can actually see the fertilizer coming out of this. You see the fertilizer right there? And it's shooting off to one side, and then it goes and it'll shoot off to the other side, and it doesn't put anything in the middle. It's a separate snout. You can take that, 2 bolts hold that snout on there. You can put a broadcast snout on it, broadcasts everywhere, if you wanted to use it for to broadcast over a whole field, and that's the banding snout. And it puts fertilizer here and here, but not in the middle.
What do they run?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I bought that spreader back in 1990 or 92. I bet I had 1,000 in it. Then, I think I paid 1,000 for it then. Anybody buy one recently?
It's been a while, but they're probably 3,000 or 4,000.
Are they?
Ground driven or PTO driven?
PTO driven. PTO driven. Yeah,
He said we bought that back in when?
90 or 92.
Our equipment, a lot of it, we have it for years, but it's taken care of properly. It does not sit out in the rain. You know, he maintains it. So maintenance of your equipment is also a very important thing to do, because you're investing all this money into it. You don't want to have to run out in 5 years and buy the same thing because you left it rust. So I just want to point out that, you know, he maintains.
And fertilizers are heck on any piece of equipment. And as soon as I am done with that, whenever I'm using it, it gets pressure washed out. The snout and everything gets removed off of it and pressure washed up inside there. And when the machine dries, I take a mixture of diesel fuel and motor oil in a spray bottle and spray it all over the inside to keep oxygen off of the metal part so you don't get rust. And it'll last me forever. A lot of the equipment that I buy used, I fix it up, I turn around, and when I go to resell it, I end up getting more for it than what I paid for it. And that's my goal most of the time, especially with tractors and things like that. Almost every tractor I've bought, I've gotten more for them than what I paid for. All right. Once the block size and row width are determined, we said that based on sprayer, kind of, okay? Then you want to keep off the woods 25 or 30 feet. Lay out straight rows. I'll go over that in a minute. Leave frequent access roads. Don't plant wall to wall. Everybody gets this, sees the dollar and cent signs in their head. If we plant all these trees, this is what we're going to return. But you can't properly care for them that way. Don't plant wall to wall. And stake out the first row of the block. All right, that's what we're going to show here. Here is the last row of that block. Now, it looks bigger than that, but it's only from this stake to this tree over here, that's 14 feet. It looks bigger than that, but that's what it is. Then what we did, we come along and we'll put a stake in. Then we'll come out here and put a stake in, 14 feet from that tree, all the way out through the field. The first row of every block is laid out with stakes. And then you'll see the tractor again, but there is a bar across the front of the tractor here. And on that bar, I have a piece of orange tape, and she can almost use it like a gun sight. And she lines that, she's sitting in the seat, she looks at that tape right across the top of the stakes, and she just drives a beeline straight down through the field, aiming for each one of those stakes. And just before she runs the stake over, we have a kid there grabbing them out of the way. Okay, and even if you do run them over, it's no big deal, because they're just tacked in the ground, it just flops over. Every now and then a culture wheel on the planter can cut them in half or something like that, but that's rare. But we usually have somebody pull them out. Straight rows, very important.
You're just doing that for the access roads?
Yes, the first row of the block, which is also an access road. Yep.
Like for the individual roads, I just put a stick out that's 6 feet.
That's what's on here. You'll see it in another slide.
Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
So it's like a corn planter that has that arm that goes down and marks your next row?
Similar, but it doesn't actually scribe the ground, because that row marker, and you're going to see it, is touching the trees on the previous row. It's sitting out there touching the tops of the trees in the previous row. You'll see it when we get there. This is your different plant populations per acre. I told you before, I don't like these narrow spacings here. It's getting a little small. This is about where I'm at, 5 by 6. And I told you some of my experimental Fraser fields were 4.5 by 6. But I would not go any smaller than that. And you choosing cutters, I think you should be up in this area right here. So with that in mind, it gives you what kind of number of plants you should be ordering. That gives you some kind of idea.
So if you were gonna cut like trees under 5 foot, like for tabletops and stuff, you would do 4x4, correct?
I still use the same small tractors for getting between the rows. Okay? So I still want I want 6 feet between my rows. Now, if you want to narrow all your trees down to 4 feet between those trees for small tabletop trees, that's fine. If that is your market, small tabletop trees, 4 foot between trees is fine. But I'm still sticking with 6 feet between my rows because I got to get my equipment up and down there. I don't plan to be check mowing because that's what my herbicides are going to do for me. Next. Okay, there's the scene. There's the tractor. She's aiming for that. This is the fold-up arm that comes down with a steel rod coming right down. Okay? And here it is right here. And that steel rod is running right over the tops of the previous row of trees. And I made that thing. A lot of this stuff you can't buy. You got to make all this stuff. I made this thing out of pipe that folds up out of the way for transporting over the road or anything like that. It's a nice little unit. I built that years ago and never changed it. It's been good ever since. And what I have here, there's different holes on this pipe here that I could adjust the row width. But from center of tractor, where I said that sight is, that piece of tape, to this pole is 6 feet. And that's how we get our 6 foot rows, but 6 feet between rows. Yeah. Go ahead, you interject, because you're the one that operates it.
You're going down your row, and he catches a huge rock underneath. It shifts the tractor. You can't put the ceiling in. You have to back up. When you back up and you try to go straight again, you're not going to get that perfectly, because your brain is in sync to keep going, but it gets crooked. So then when you get your next row, sometimes even though that bar is on the side with the post hanging down, you may have to eye it to say, okay, it's kinking out this way. I have to just keep it going this way instead of following that part. So you have to eyeball it also to make that adjustment to get that row straight. You always keep trying to get back straight. For the most part, you can do that, but you're going to hit rocks, and it just takes the whole machine and it kicks it
Shifts
over.
it sideways. Yep.
Yeah.
Or hooking a root. If a field that we prepared by rototilling, we can still hit a root or a stump. It jams up the shoe of the planter. She stops. We lift the planter up. I pull the jam out. She'll back up. And then it's never quite exactly where she was. But then she has to eyeball that to get that straight. All right. Sample of the planter. This is, I had that book here. I don't know if somebody take it. They can have it. I don't know. Oh, tree equipment design. This is a tree equipment design planter. I cannot say enough for them. They are indestructible, absolutely indestructible machine, and you will not find another more efficient machine on them. The body here, this is a solid 4-inch steel body that weighs about 800 pounds. And when you sink that baby in the ground, it stays in the ground. Okay? You hit rock and shale, she won't ride out. She'll just tear right on through it.
What kind of horsepower is required?
I think you need a minimum of 40 horsepower to operate a planter. Minimum 40. That tractor, it's on a 48 in this picture. That tractor's now gone. It's now on a 90 horsepower 6610. The shoe, that is the shoe. The manufacturer makes different width shoes. That's a 4-inch shoe. There's a 4-inch opening, which is as big as anything I've almost ever needed. You can't see it because it's blocked by the marking wheel, but there is a backhoe tooth on the end, a removable backhoe tooth on the end of the shoe. It's held in by a pin. You drive the pin out and put a new tooth on, and you're ready to go. That's the only thing. That's about the only thing that wears. Years and years and years of wear. You can get this piece of metal here thin. I've had to weld new plates in there to build that up already from years of use. And then your marking wheel. You will get marking wheels. You buy the marking wheel you want on your spacing. Mine is 5 foot between trees. So one revolution of that white spoke is 5 feet. So every time that spoke comes around, boom, I set a tree. Set a tree. but I only do it on the first row. This frustrates her. She thinks I should be using it all the time. But there's wheel slippage. There's wheel slippage in the tractor, especially on plowed ground. There's wheel slippage in this. And even if the very first tree, I line that up on the next row, line it up perfect, I get 4 or 5 trees down, and I'm going to be out of sync. Because I told you before, I like to plant on the square, directly across from one another. So you have to eyeball it. You got to get in a rhythm of knowing you got to start setting that plant just before you get to the one in the previous row. If you wait till you get right there, by the time the plant is set, you've already gone past and it doesn't quite line up. It takes a lot of practice.
Get spikes or something on that to stop the wheel slippage?
No, there's no spikes on that. Now, this is an older style. Now the marking wheels on the newer models are out the back, and there's a clicker on it. A click, 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 and every time it clicks, you set a plant. But again, there's different size marking wheels based on the width you want between your plants.
What's the depth of that shoe?
That's probably close to 12 inches there. Now you're not setting it. You're probably cutting. Well, you can see where most of the wear is. It's from there on down. So I bet you're cutting through about 10 inches of soil.
Right.
Now you're not jamming the plant all the way down there as far as she'll go. I take my hand like this, use my finger, and I set it's right between my legs. As I set it in the furrow there, I like to feel the dirt gripping my finger as the furrow is closing in. Feel that dirt just gripping your finger. Pull out, grab the next plant, and ready to go. And you only want them planted just a little bit deeper than they were in the nursery. I told you about that one farmer. He was planting them way up to here. The problem was he bought real whippy plants, and he thought he was taking the whip out of them by planting them deep. Something like you would do with a tomato plant. You can plant a tomato plant deep as anything, and it keeps growing roots out. Well, you can't get this plant. These don't do that. And the easiest way I can describe it is your hands are made of one tissue. The tissue in your mouth is a different type of tissue. The tissue in your mouth stays wet all the time. Your hands and feet don't stay wet all the time. What happens if I take tissue that's made to be dry and soak it in moisture day in and day out? What happens to your skin on your hands, your feet? The skin will slough off. What do you think happens here? There, if you can think of it that way, that has how you understand your planting depth.
Paul, you going about, what do you say, about a half inch up above from where the nursery had?
About a half inch to an inch. Yeah, no more than an inch.
Did you say you can adjust how deep you do it with the hydraulics?
Well, yeah. No, I didn't say that. If I'm in harder ground, she doesn't realize. She can't tell what I'm experiencing back there. She's watching her straight line, and she can control the depth of the hydraulics. And I'll just start. I'll holler at her deeper, and she'll allow me. She'll sink it down deeper. I said up, and pretty loud. I have to holler her pretty loud, and so she lifts the hydraulic up a little bit, so we get that depth that we're looking for.
Paul, you said that you use the white in there for the first line. What do you do then for the second?
Every time it comes around, is 5 feet.
Right. You said you use
Takes
it
the
for
wheel
your
off.
first row.
Oh, after that comes off.
And then how do you line them up?
Eyeball it to the previous row. Yep. Eyeball it to the previous row. Next. Okay. Once the trees are planted, they need to be straightened and stomped. We try to get them as straight, but sometimes they're leaning off like that. And we have a crew of high school kids that come along and stomp them off and straighten them up like that. Just got to be careful, especially on Frasers. If they get a little overzealous and trying to heel them in, you can bark them. That bark is pretty soft on them. You got to be very careful with that. And but you can see how nice plowed ground works. I know it was plowed the fall before, but it works real nice. Go ahead. Any other questions about that? About the planting? Hand planting, the way we used to do it years ago, we had 2 pieces of concrete reinforcing bar and a string between them. We'd mark off between the previous row, drive a stake in, go out here so many feet, drive a stake in, and then we would plant along that. That's how we were trying to get our straight rows with a string. Okay? I don't know of any other way besides that, using a string or something like that to get a straight row if you're planting by hand. The weird thing about a lot of the Christmas tree equipment that we use, we spend this kind of money on equipment and we use it 1 or 2 days a year. That's another thing unique about the tree industry. That planter, if I use that 3 or 4 days a year, I'm lucky, and it sits in the barn the rest of the time. But I have that investment in it. It's equipment you don't find at a rental place, okay? And anybody else who has one, they're going to need it the same time you need it, because you only have a narrow window of opportunity for planting. Same with Christmas tree balers. They sit in the barn 10 months out of the year, but I got 4 balers.